the true story that shook the town. Hey y'all, I'm Tyler, and I gotta tell you about the craziest night of my life. I never believed in ghosts or any of that paranormal stuff until that fateful night changed everything. This is my true story, straight from my own eyes, and I promise you, it's as real as it gets. It all started on a sweltering summer night in late August, back when I was just 18 and looking for a thrill. My buddies and I had heard all the creepy legends about the old Miller Place house on the outskirts of town. A rundown, abandoned place that had been empty for decades. Folks in town whispered that something sinister lurked behind its cracked walls. We'd grown up on those stories, but like most teenagers, we figured it was all hogwash until that night. It was just past midnight when my best friend, Chris, leaned over during a late-night bonfire at his place and said, "Tyler, you ever wonder what really happened at the Miller Place house?" I laughed it off at first. I mean, come on. Ghost stories are for movies, right? But Chris had that glint in his eye, the one that told me he was serious. After a few rounds of cheap beer and some dares exchanged over the fire, we all agreed. Tonight, we'd go check out the infamous house. The ride there was long and tense. The further we drove, the quieter it got until the only sound was the hum of the car engine and the occasional rustle of dry leaves on the road. When we finally pulled up, the house loomed ahead like something out of a horror flick. Its silhouette was barely lit by the moon, and the thick, humid air was heavy with an eerie silence that made my skin crawl. I remember stepping out of the car, heart pounding like a drum. "You sure about this, man?" I whispered to Chris, half expecting him to back out. But he just grinned, clapping me on the shoulder. "Relax, Tyler. Let's go see if the legends are true." Walking up to the front door, I couldn't help but notice how decrepit the place looked. The paint was peeling off in long, crumbling strips, and the windows were all shattered, like they'd been attacked by something with a vendetta. The door, though, was ajar, just a crack, almost like it was inviting us in. As we pushed it open, the creak of old wood echoed through the empty hall. Inside, the smell hit us hard, a mix of decay, mold, and something I can't quite describe, like old secrets. I fumbled with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, revealing shadows that danced across walls scarred by time. Every step we took was accompanied by the sound of our own nervous footsteps and the distant drip of water from a leaky roof. Chris, always the bold one, whispered, "Tyler, you feel that chill, like someone's watching us?" I nodded, my throat dry as sandpaper. The air was so thick, it felt like you could reach out and grab it. We started exploring room by room. In what used to be the living room, there was a musty sofa draped in dusty sheets and a few old family photos that had long since faded. It was like stepping into a forgotten memory. But the deeper we went, the more unsettling things became. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Occurrences. It wasn't long before we heard it, a low, almost inaudible whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. I froze. Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chris just nodded, eyes wide with fear. We followed the sound down a narrow corridor, the beam of our flashlights trembling with every shaky step. At the end of the hall, we reached a room that looked like it had been a study. Dust-covered books lay scattered on the floor, and an old desk sat against the wall. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, a faint movement, like a shadow flitting past. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the echo of our own footsteps and a lingering sense of dread. That's when the door slammed shut behind us with a force that knocked the breath right out of me. Chris tried the handle, but it was stuck fast. Panic began to seep in as we realized we were trapped in this room with something unseen. I remember thinking, this ain't happening. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. Every sound, every whisper in the silence was amplified, building up the tension until it was almost unbearable. After what felt like hours, the door finally creaked open on its own. We didn't waste a single second. Bolting out of that room, we rushed back through the maze of dark hallways. The house seemed to come alive as shadows moved on their own, and cold drafts swirled around us as if invisible hands were reaching out to grab us. We ended up in a long, narrow hallway lined with old, peeling wallpaper. At the far end, barely visible in the dim light, was a figure. It wasn't clearly human, more like a silhouette, twisted and distorted. My stomach churned with dread. I remember Chris muttering, "Tyler, we gotta get out of here." But we both knew it wasn't that simple. We ran back to the main room, our flashlights bouncing wildly against the walls, trying to find an exit. Every door we tried was either locked or led us back into another claustrophobic corridor. The house seemed to have a mind of its own, trapping us in an endless loop of terror. At one point, I swear I saw the figure following us, a tall, thin shape, with hollow eyes that seemed to burn with an unholy light. It never spoke, but its presence was enough to paralyze us with fear. I remember feeling as though every nerve in my body was on fire. And all I could think was, I need to get the hell out of here. After what felt like an eternity, we stumbled upon a narrow staircase leading down into the basement. With no other option, we descended as quickly as we could. The stairs were creaky, and the air grew colder with every step. In the basement, everything was darker, and the silence was broken only by the sound of our ragged breathing. We could feel a presence in the basement, a heavy, oppressive force that made our skin crawl. I remember Chris's voice shaking as he said, "Tyler, this is it. We gotta find a way out now." We scrambled around, searching for an exit, but the basement was a labyrinth of old storage rooms and forgotten relics. Then, out of the darkness, we heard a sound, a faint rustling, like someone moving just beyond the edge of the light. It was then that I saw it again, a flash of movement, a glimpse of something that shouldn't exist. In that moment, time stopped. I felt paralyzed, frozen in place as the figure came closer. It was hard to describe, like a twisted, nightmarish version of a human, with limbs that bent in unnatural angles and eyes that were completely black. The creature moved with a silent, predatory grace, and I knew without a doubt that we had to run. Chris and I bolted. Our only thought was to escape that cursed place. We raced through the maze of rooms and corridors, hearts pounding in our chests, each step taking us further away from the horror behind us. The house seemed to scream with every footstep we took, the walls groaning as if they were alive and in pain. Finally, we burst through a back door into the cool night air. We didn't stop running until we were a good distance away, back to the safety of the car. I remember slamming the door shut and leaning back, gasping for breath, trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking, and for a long time afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me. In the days that followed, I couldn't get that night out of my head. Every creak in my apartment, every shadow that moved in the corner of my eye reminded me of the terror inside the Miller Place house. I tried to convince myself it was just a bad trip, a product of our overactive imaginations, fueled by local legends. But the evidence was all there. Photos on our phones, shaky video clips with inexplicable sounds, and the overwhelming sense that what we experienced was all too real. I started researching the history of the house. According to old newspaper clippings and town records, the Miller Place house had once belonged to a reclusive family with a dark past. Rumors of strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, and even reports of ghostly figures had circulated for years. Some said the family had dabbled in the occult, trying to contact forces beyond our world. Whatever the truth was, it was clear that something evil had taken root in that house, and it had never truly left. The more I dug into it, the more I became convinced that what we encountered wasn't a figment of our imagination. Late at night, I'd find myself rewatching the footage, searching for clues that could explain the inexplicable. Every time I saw that shadowy figure or heard that strange whisper, I'd feel a cold shiver run down my spine. Even now, as I write this, I can't help but feel that if I close my eyes, I might see that figure standing at the end of my hallway. I tried to warn my friends, but many of them brushed it off as teenage nonsense. Still, a few admitted that since that night, they'd started having nightmares, visions of the house, of that twisted figure, and of voices whispering in the dark. The experience left a mark on all of us, a scar that we'd never fully heal from. A few weeks after that horrifying night, I decided to return to the house on my own. I needed answers. I couldn't live with the constant fear of the unknown looming over me. I told myself that if I could face whatever was inside, maybe I'd finally be able to put it to rest. With a heavy heart and a trembling hand, I drove back to Miller Place. The house looked even more foreboding in the daylight, its broken windows like gaping mouths in the peeling paint, a testament to years of neglect. I parked a good distance away and approached on foot, every step filled with both determination and dread. Inside, everything was just as I remembered. The stale smell, the decaying furniture, the oppressive silence that hung in the air. I made my way to the very room where the door had slammed shut that night. I pressed my ear against the cold wood, half expecting to hear a voice or the sound of footsteps. But there was nothing, just silence and the soft rustle of dust. Then, as I was about to leave, I heard it again. That faint, almost imperceptible whisper calling my name. "Tyler," it seemed to say, echoing through the empty room. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribcage. Was it my mind playing tricks, or had the house come alive with the voices of the past? I couldn't tell. I gathered up my courage and stepped out into the hallway, following the sound. It led me down a narrow corridor lined with faded portraits whose eyes seemed to follow me. I passed by the study, where I once saw the scattered books and the old desk, and then I reached a small door tucked away in a corner. It was slightly ajar, and a dim light spilled out onto the floor. My instincts screamed at me to run, but curiosity and perhaps a desperate need for closure drove me forward. I pushed the door open and found myself in a tiny, forgotten room that looked like it had once been a child's bedroom. The remnants of a cradle, a broken toy, and a faded drawing on the wall painted a sorrowful picture of a life once filled with hope and innocence. But what caught my attention was the sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping coming from behind a locked closet door. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, wondering what could possibly be making that sound after all these years. Inside the closet, I found an old, dusty box filled with mementos, a faded photograph of a smiling family, a broken music box, and several letters tied with a red ribbon. I carefully opened one of the letters, its paper brittle and yellowed with age. The letter was written by someone named Eleanor, describing strange happenings in the house, hints of voices in the night, and the feeling that something was watching her. As I read, I felt a deep sadness mixed with terror. It was as if Eleanor had known exactly what I was experiencing, a terror that transcended time. The tapping grew louder, and I could no longer ignore it. I closed the letter and backed out of the closet, heart racing. I left the room and retraced my steps, determined to escape the oppressive grip of the house. As I made my way back to the front door, the whispering resumed, soft and sorrowful, as if begging me to stay. But I couldn't. I burst out into the daylight, gasping for air, feeling as if the weight of that cursed place had finally lifted off my shoulders. Even after that day, I couldn't shake off the memories of that night. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, hear soft whispers when I was alone, and sometimes feel cold presence right behind me. I tried to convince myself that it was all over, that I had left that horror behind. But deep down, I knew the house had imprinted itself on my soul. Friends who heard my story told me I'd changed, that I looked haunted even during the day. I'd get these long stretches of silence, as if I were lost in thought or listening to voices only I could hear. Every time I passed by a dimly lit alley or a decrepit building, I'd feel a pang of fear, wondering if that darkness held another secret waiting to be uncovered. I started attending local meetings where folks shared ghost stories and unexplained phenomena. The more I listened, the more I realized how many of these stories had a common thread. Abandoned places, tragic pasts, and restless spirits. It wasn't just about a haunted house. It was about the idea that some places hold memories so powerful, so painful, that they manifest into something beyond our understanding. In the months that followed, I'd find myself drawn back to that experience. I'd rewatch the shaky footage we'd taken, examining every frame for clues. I'd scour old newspaper archives, read every account I could find about the Miller Place house, and even reached out to local historians. I learned that the family who once lived there had met a tragic end. Rumors of a mysterious fire, unexplained disappearances, and whispered tales of curses that had haunted the family for generations. None of it added up neatly, but it was enough to confirm that what I experienced was more than just a figment of my imagination. Sometimes, late at night, I'd drive by the outskirts of town and pass near the old house's location. Even from a distance, I could feel the pull of that darkness, a magnetic force that seemed to call out to me, daring me to come back. I never did. I was too scared of what I might find if I did. The memory of that night, the feeling of being watched, and the sound of those whispered voices would never truly leave me. Acceptance and mourning. Over time, I've come to accept that some things in life are meant to remain mysteries. The Miller Place house, with all its horrors and unexplained events, taught me that there are forces in this world that defy explanation. I've learned to live with that fear, to channel it into something creative, something that pushes me to understand the unknown rather than run from it. But I also feel a duty, a responsibility to warn others. There's a reason those stories have persisted through generations, and I hope that by sharing my experience, I can help someone avoid the same fate. If you ever find yourself curious about an abandoned place, remember that not everything is as it seems. Some doors are meant to stay closed, and some mysteries are best left unsolved. I still get chills when I think about that night. The memory of the shadowy figure at the end of the hall, the echo of the whispers, and the desperate panic that surged through me will forever be etched into my mind. I'm Tyler, and I'm telling you this because I want you to know sometimes the truth is scarier than any story you'll ever hear. Epilogue. Years have passed since that night, and though I try to lead a normal life, there are moments when I catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye. A shadow too dark, a whisper too soft. I know that the house and its secrets still linger in the fabric of our town, waiting for the next curious soul to wander in. And trust me, if you ever come across an abandoned place with a dark past, just remember, some mysteries are meant to stay hidden. Thanks for listening, y'all. This is my story, a true account of a night I'll never forget. Stay safe and remember, always be wary of what lurks in the shadows.